are live. Okay, and we're live yet again with video, despite the Josh Datko post today. And should Josh see this, I'd like to point out that I agree with what he had to say. I think he has great points, but I do not share the extremities of his sentiment. So I'm live, the talking head with video again. Cortez is here joining us. And we're getting ambitious with it. We're gonna read Paradise Lost, the whole thing. And we're gonna see how it is. So Paradise Lost, I don't know anything about it. I haven't even read the introduction to this. I have the Penguin Classics edition. And the first book is about 800 lines of verse. So the way this book is set up is, it's an epic poem. The way it's set up is 12 books, I believe. Yeah, 12 books. He's kind of following the tradition of the Aeneid, as opposed to the more British tradition, which is interesting. And prior to the verse of each book, he writes an argument, kind of a summary of what is going to be contained within. And we can see, even just within the form, we can understand the importance of this on the Western canon, most notably with how it impacts Moby Dick and Blood Meridian. So Melville and McCarthy both borrowed from John Milton here. We see this with the descriptions before each chapter in those books, which might not have stemmed from Milton, but it's following in that tradition. And we also see examples of Milton's Satan in the characters of the judge and Ahab, which is really interesting. And I'd like to read this to understand that more closely. That's my biggest incentive. I need this kind of foundational to the English and American Western canon. So let's get into it, I guess. Book 1, The Argument. This first book proposes, first in brief, the whole subject, man's disobedience and the loss thereupon of paradise wherein he was placed, then touches on the prime cause of his fall, the serpent, or rather Satan in the serpent, who revolting from God and drawing to his side many legions of angels, was by the command of God driven out of heaven with all his crew into the great deep. Which action passed over, the poem hastes into the midst of things, presenting Satan with his angels now fallen into hell, described here, not in the center, for heaven and earth may be supposed as not yet made, certainly not yet accursed, but in a place of utter darkness, fitliest called chaos. Here Satan and his angels, lying on the burning lake, thunderstruck and astonished, after a certain space recovers, as from confusion, calls up him who next in order and dignity lay by him. They confer of their miserable fall. Satan awakens all his legions, who lay till then in the same manner confounded. They rise, their numbers array of battle, their chief leaders named according to the idols known afterwards in Canaan, and the countries adjoining. To these Satan directs his speech, comforts them with hope yet of regaining heaven, but tells them lastly of a new world and a new kind of creature to be created, according to an ancient prophecy or report in heaven. For that angels were long before this visible creation, was the opinion of many ancient fathers. To find out the truth of this prophecy and what to determine thereon, he refers to a full council, what his associates thence attempt. Pandemonium in the place of Satan rises, suddenly built out of the deep, then infernal peers there sit in council. All right, so we can expect the fall of Satan, not to hell, but to chaos, and the council of Satan surrounding the creation of Earth, I suppose. And I will kind of build the world here. So Milton's universe is like the little human universe, what we inhabit, surrounded by this not nothingness, but this chaos, and heaven above. And then hell and the universe are created out of this chaos. So in Milton's theology, hell and earth are not created out of nothing. They're created out of this like wild foment, this chaos, that God is in some way in interplay with. It's really interesting ontology. So I have read a little bit of the introduction. I stole that from John Leonard. Okay. Book 1. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, with the loss of Eden till one greater man restore us and again and regain the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed. In the beginning, how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos, or of Sion hill, delight thee more, and Siloa's brook that flowed. Fast by the oracle of God, I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song, that with no middle flight intends to soar above the Aeonian mountain, while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. And chiefly thou, O Spirit, that dost prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure, instruct me, for thou know'st, thou from the first was present, and with mighty wings outspread, dove-like sat brooding on the vast abyss, and madst it pregnant. What in me is dark, illumine; what is low, raise and support, that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence, and justify the ways of God to men. Say first, for heaven hides nothing from thy view, nor the deep tract of hell. Say first, what cause moved our grandparents in that happy state, favored of heaven so highly, to fall off from their Creator and transgress his will? For one restraint, lords of the world besides, who first seduced them to that foul revolt? The infernal serpent, he it was whose guile, stirred up with envy and revenge, deceived the mother of mankind. What time his pride had cast him out from heaven, with all his host of rebel angels, by whose aid aspiring to set himself in glory above his peers. Since, through experience of this great event, in arms not worse, in foresight much advanced, we may with more successful hope resolve to wage by force or guile eternal war, irreconcilable to our grand foe, who now triumphs, and in the excess of joy, sole reigning holds the tyranny of heaven. So spake the apostate angel, though in pain, vaunting aloud, but racked with deep despair, and him thus answered soon his bold compeer. All right, that's the first 125 or so lines. Yeah, Cortez says very Gnostic, which is interesting. I think Milton was kind of coming out of this Catholic, some pagan influences, but also I think it was Thomas Catholics. And I'm wondering if that was the Gospel of Thomas or something else, because the Gospel of Thomas is a Gnostic text. Not that I've read it, but that's what academic influence I have. So it could very well be coming from a Gnostic perspective. Milton has a very traditional sense of the Christian God. And, in the early tumult of Christianity, there were many, many sects, pun intended. And many very diverse divisions before it kind of got standardized. So very likely that he had Gnostic influences and read very Gnostic texts that ended up not being in the contemporary Christian canon. And then he starts, okay, so going back to book 1, he starts with this invocation to God or to the angels, very in line with the Greek invocation to the muses. And now we move on to the apostate angel, Satan, addressing his followers. O Prince, O Chief of many throned powers, that led the embattled seraphim to war, under thy conduct and in dreadful deeds, fearless, endangered heaven's perpetual king, and put to proof his high supremacy, whether upheld by strength or chance or fate. Too well I see and rue the dire event, that with sad overthrow and foul defeat hath lost us heaven, and all this mighty host in horrible destruction laid thus low, as far as gods and heavenly essences can perish, for the mind and spirit remains invincible, and vigor soon returns, though all our glory extinct and happy state here swallowed up in endless misery. But what if he, our conqueror, whom I now of force believe almighty, since no less than such could have overpowered such force as ours, have left us this our spirit and strength entire, strongly to suffer and support our pains, that we may so suffice his vengeful ire, or do him mightier service as his thralls, by right of war, whatever business be, here in the heart of hell to work in fire, or do his errands in the gloomy deep. What can it then avail, though yet we feel strength undiminished or eternal being, to undergo eternal punishment? Whereto with speedy words the arch-fiend replied, Fallen cherub, to be weak is miserable, doing or suffering. But of this be sure, to do aught good will never be our task, but ever to do ill our sole delight. As being the contrary to his high will, whom we resist, if then his providence of our evil seek to bring forth good, our labor must be to prevent that end, and out of good still to find means of evil, which ofttimes may succeed so as perhaps shall grieve him, if I fail not and disturb his inmost counsels from their destined aim, but see the angry victor hath recalled his ministers of vengeance and pursuit back to the gates of heaven. The sulphurous hail shot after us in storm o'erblown hath laid the fiery surge that from the precipice of heaven received us falling, and the thunder, winged with red lightning in impetuous rage, perhaps hath spent his shafts and ceases now to bellow through the vast and boundless deep. Let us not slip the occasion, whether scorn or satiate fury yield it from our foe. Seest thou yon dreary plain, forlorn and wild, the seat of desolation void of light? Save what the glimmering of these livid flames cast pale and dreadful. Thither let us tend from off the tossing of these fiery waves. Their rest, if any rest can harbor there. And reassembling our afflicted powers, consult how we may henceforth most offend our enemy, our own loss how repair, how overcome this dire calamity. What reinforcement may we gain from hope, if not what resolution from despair? Thus Satan talking to his nearest mate, with head uplift above the wave and eyes that sparkling blazed, his other parts besides, prone on the flood, extended long and large, lay floating many a rood, in bulk as huge as whom the fables name of monstrous size, Titanian or earthborn, that warred on Jove, Briareos or Typhon, whom the den by ancient Tarsus held, or that sea beast, Leviathan, which god of all his works created hugest that swim the ocean stream, him haply slumbering on the Norway foam, that pilot of some small night-foundered skiff, deeming some island oft as seamen tell, with fixed anchor in his scaly rind, moors by his side under the lee, while night invests the sea and wished morn delays. So stretched out in length the arch-fiend lay, chained on the burning lake, nor ever thence had risen or heaved his head, but that the will and high permission of all-ruling heaven left him at large to his own dark designs, that with reiterated crimes he might heap on himself damnation, while he sought evil to others and enraged might see how all his malice served but to bring forth infinite goodness, grace, and mercy shown on man by him seduced, but on himself treble confusion, wrath, and vengeance poured. Forthwith upright he rears off from off the pool, his mighty stature, on each hand the flames, driven backward, slope their pointing spires, and rolled in billows, leave in the midst a horrible veil. Then, with expanded wings, he steers his flight aloft, incumbent on the dusky air, that felt unusual weight, till on dry land he lights, if it were land that ever burned, with solid as the lake with liquid fire, and such appeared in hue as when the force of subterranean winds transports a hill, torn from Pelorus, or the shattered side of thundering Etna, whose combustible and fueled entrails thence conceiving fire, sublimed with mineral fury, aid the winds, and leave a singed bottom on all involved. With stench and smoke, such resting found the soul of unblessed feet. Him followed his next mate, both glorying to have escaped the Stygian flood as gods, and by their own recovered strength, not by the sufferance of supernal power. Hmm. All right, we get the description of the lake of fire, and Satan and his closest mate have unchained themselves from it. Cool. Also, that soliloquy by Satan was kind of fire. Not gonna lie, that was fun to read. Is that blaspheming? Should I say that? All right. Is this the region? This the soil, the clime? Said the lost archangel. This the seat that we must change for heaven? This mournful gloom for that celestial light? Be it so, since he who is now sovereign can dispose and bid what shall be right. Farthest from him is best. Whom reason has equaled, force hath made supreme above his equals. Farewell, happy fields, where joy forever dwells. Hail, horrors, hail, infernal world, and thou profoundest hell. Receive thy new possessor, one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. The mind in its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. That matter where, if I be still the same, and what I shall be all but less than he, whom thunder had made greater. Here at least we shall be free, the Almighty hath not built. Here for his envy will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice, to reign is worth the ambition through in hell. Oh man, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. But wherefore let we then compare our faithful friends, the associates and co-partners of our loss, lie thus astonished in the oblivious pool, and call them not to share with us their part in this unhappy mansion, or once more, with rallied arms to try what may be yet regained in heaven, or what more lost in hell. So Satan spake, and him Beelzebub thus answered, leader of those armies bright, which but the omnipotent none could have foiled. If once they hear that voice, their liveliest pledge of hopes and fears and dangers heard so oft, in the worst extremes and on the perilous edge of battle when it raged in all assaults, their surest signal they will soon resume, new courage and revive, though now they lie groveling and prostrate on the yon lake of fire. As erewhile astounded and amazed, no wonder fall in such a pernicious hideth. That's one of Milton's customized words. Hideth. That's terrible. Okay. He scarce had ceased when the superior fiend was moving toward the shore, his ponderous shield, ethereal temper, massy, large and round, behind him cast the broad circumference, hung on his shoulders like the moon, whose orb through optic glass the Tuscan artist views, at evening from the top of Faesol or in Valdarno, to descry new lands. Rivers or mountains in her spotty globe, his spear to equal which the tallest pine, hewn on Norwegian hills, to be the mast of some great amiral, were but a wand. He walked with to support uneasy steps over the burning marl, not like those steps on heaven's azure, and the torrid climb smote him sore besides, vaulted with fire. Nathless he so endured, till on the beach of that inflamed sea he stood and called his legions, angel forms, who lay entranced, thick as autumnal leaves that strow the brooks in Vallombrosa, where the Etrurian shades, high overarched, embowed, or scattered sedge, afloat when the fierce winds, Orion armed, hath vexed the Red Sea coast, whose waves o'erthrew Busiris and his Memphian chivalry, while with perfidious hatred they pursued the sojourners of Goshen, who beheld from the safe shore their floating carcasses, and broken chariot wheels so thick bestrown, abject and lost lay these covering the flood. Under amazement of their hideous change, he called so loud that all of the hollow deep of hell resounded. Princes, potentates, warriors, the flower of heaven, once yours, now lost. If such astonishment as these can seize eternal spirits, or have ye chosen this place, after the toil of battle to repose your wearied virtue, for the ease you find to slumber here as in the vales of heaven, or in this abject posture have ye sworn to adore the conqueror, who now beholds cherub and seraph rolling in the flood with scattered arms and ensigns, till anon his swift pursuers from heaven gates discern the advantage, and descending tread us down, thus drooping with linked thunderbolts, transfix us to the bottom of this gulf. Awake, arise, or forever be fallen. All right, if you're just joining, Satan has been cast out of heaven, his army defeated by God, and they are in the lake of hell down below, below chaos. And Satan soliloquizes, he rallies the troops, and those who are cast out are now being called to action by him. Yeah, so that's where we are. They heard and were abashed, and up they sprung upon the wing as when men want to watch, on duty, sleeping found by whom they dread, rouse and bestir themselves well awake. Nor did they perceive the evil plight in which they were, or the fierce pains not feel. Yet to their general's voice they soon obeyed, innumerable, as when the potent rod of Amram's son in Egypt's evil day waved round the coast, up called a pitchy cloud of locusts, warping on the eastern wind, that o'er the realm of impious Pharaoh hung, like night, and darkened all the land of Nile. So numberless were those bad angels seen, hovering on wing under the cope of hell, twixt upper nether and surrounding fires, till, as a signal given, the uplifted spear of their great sultan waving to direct their course, in even balance down they lit on the fire brimstone and fill all the plain, a multitude like which the populous north poured never from her frozen loins to pass Ren or Donna, when her barbarous sons came like a deluge on the south and spread beneath Gibraltar to the Libyan sands. Forthwith from every squadron and each band the heads and leaders thither haste where stood their great commander, godlike shapes and forms excelling human princely dignities, and powers that erst in heaven sat on thrones, though of their names in heavenly records now be no memorial, blotted out and razed by their rebellion from the books of life, nor had they yet among the sons of Eve got them new names, till wandering o'er the earth, through God's high sufferance for the trial of man, by falsities and lies the greatest part of mankind they corrupted to forsake God their Creator and the invisible glory of Him that made them transform, oft to the image of a brute adorned with gay religions full of pomp and gold, and devils to adore their deities. When they were known to men by various names, and various idols through the heathen world, say, Muse, their names then known, who first, who last, roused from the slumber on that fiery couch, at their great emperor's call as next in worth, came singingly where he stood on the bare sand, while the promiscuous crowd stood yet aloof. The chief were those who from the pit of hell, roaming to seek their prey on earth, durst fix their seats long after next the seat of God. Their altars by his altar, gods adored among the nations round, and durst abide Jehovah thundering out of Sion, throned between the cherubim, ye often placed within his sanctuary itself their shrines, abominations, and with cursed things his holy rites in solemn feast profaned, and with their darkness durst affront his light. First Moloch, horrid king, besmeared with blood of human sacrifice and parents' tears, though for the noise of drums and timbrels loud, their children's cries unheard, that passed through fire to his grim idol. Him the Ammonite worshipped in Rabbah and her watery plain, in Argob and in Bashan to the stream of utmost Arnon. Nor content with such audacious neighborhood, the wisest heart of Solomon he led by fraud to build his temple right against the temple of God on that opprobrious hill, and made his grove the pleasant valley of Hinnom, Tophet thence, and black Gehenna called, the type of hell. Next Chemos, the obscene dread of Moab's sons, from Aror to Nebo, in the wild of southernmost Abarim, in Hezebon and Horonaim, Sion's realm, beyond the flowery dale of Sibma clad with vines, and Elel to the asphaltic pool, Peor, his other name, when he enticed Israel and Siddim on their march from Nile to do him wanton rites, which cost them woe. Yet thence his lustful orgies he enlarged, even to that hill of scandal by the grove of Moloch homicide, lust hard by hate, till good Josiah drove them thence to hell. With these came they, who from the bordering flood of old Euphrates to the brook that parts Egypt from Syrian ground, had general names of Baalim and Ashtaroth, those male, these feminine, for spirits, when they please, can either sex assume, or both, so soft and uncompounded is their essence pure, not tied or manacled with joint or limb, nor founded on the brittle strength of bones, like cumbrous flesh, but in what shape they choose, dilated or condensed, bright or obscure, can execute their airy purposes, and works of love or enmity fulfill. For these the race of Israel oft forsook their living strength, and unfrequented left his righteous altar, bowing lowly down to bestial gods, for which their heads as low bowed down in battle, sunk before the spear of despicable foes. With these in troop came Astoreth, whom the Phoenicians called Astarte, queen of heaven, with crescent horns, to whose bright image nightly the moon, Sidonian virgins paid their vows and songs. In Sion also not unsung, where stood her temple on the offensive mountain built by that uxorious king, whose heart, though large, beguiled by fair idolatresses, fell. 2 idols foul. Thamuz came next behind, whose annual wound in Lebanon allured the Syrian damsels to lament his fate in amorous ditties all a summer's day, while smooth Adonis from his native rock ran purple to the sea, supposed with blood of Thamuz yearly wounded. The love-tale infected Sion's daughters with like heat. Those wanton passions on the sacred porch Ezekiel saw, when by the vision led, his eye surveyed the dark idolatries of alienated Judah. Next came one who mourned in earnest when the captive ark maimed his brute image, head and hands lopped off, in his own temple on the Grunzel edge, where he fell flat and shamed his worshippers. Dagon his name, sea monster, upward man, and downward fish. Yet had his temple high, reared in Azotus, dreaded through the coast of Palestine, in Gath and Ascalon, and Acheron and Gaza's frontier bounds. Him followed Rimmon, whose delightful seat was fair Damascus on the fertile banks of Abana and Pharphar, lucid streams. He also against the house of God was bold. A leper once he lost and gained a king. Ahaz, his sottish conqueror, whom he drew to God's altar to disparage in his place, for one of Syrian mode, whereupon to burn his odious offerings, whereupon and adore the gods whom he had vanquished. After these appeared a crew who under names of old renown, Osiris, Isis, Horus, and their train with monstrous shapes and sorceries abused fanatic Egypt and her priests, to seek their wandering gods disguised in brutish forms rather than human. Nor did Israel escape the infection when their borrowed gold composed the calf in Oreb, and the rebel king doubled that sin in Bethel and in Dan, likening his maker to the grazed ox. Jehovah, who in one night, when he passed from Egypt marching, equaled with one stroke both her firstborn and all her bleeding gods. Belial came last, than whom a spirit more lewd fell not from heaven, or more gross to love, vice for itself. To him no temple stood, or altar smoked. Yet who more oft than he, in temples and at altars, when the priest turns atheist, as did Eli's sons, who filled with lust and violence in the house of God? In courts and palaces he also reigns, and in luxurious cities where the noise of riot ascends above their loftiest towers, and injury and outrage, and when night darkens the streets, then wander forth the sons of Belial, flown with insolence and wine, witness the streets of Sodom, and that night in Gibeah, when the hospital door exposed a matron to avoid worse rape. These were the prime in order and in might. The rest were long to tell, though far renowned. The Ionian gods of Javan's issue held gods, yet confessed later than heaven and earth, their boasted parents, Titan, heaven's firstborn, with his enormous brood and birthright seized by younger Saturn. He from mightier Jove, his own and Rhea's sons like measure found. So Jove usurping reigned, these first in Crete and Ida known, then on the snowy top of cold Olympus ruled the middle air, their highest heaven, or on the Delphian cliff, or in Dodona, and through all the bounds of Doric land, or who with Saturn old fled over Adria to the Hesperian fields, and o'er the Celtic roamed the utmost isles. All these and more came flocking, both looks downcast and damp, yet such wherein appeared obscure some glimpse of joy, to have found their chief not in despair, to have found themselves not lost in loss itself, which on his countenance cast like doubtful hue, but his wonted pride, soon recollecting with high words that bore semblance of worth, not substance, gently raised their fainting courage and dispelled their fears. Then straight commands that at the warlike sound of trumpets loud and clarions be upreared, his mighty standard, that proud honor claimed, Azazel as his right, a cherub tall, who forthwith from the glittering staff unfurled the imperial ensign, which full high advanced, shone like a meteor streaming to the wind, with gems and gold luster rich emblazoned, seraphic arms and trophies all the while, sonorous metal blowing martial sounds, at which the universal host upsent a shout that tore hell's concave and beyond, frighted the reign of chaos and old night. All in a moment, though the gloom were seen, 10,000 banners rise into the air with orient colors waving. With them rose a forest huge of spears and thronging helms appeared, and serried shields in thick array, of depth immeasurable. Anon they move in perfect phalanx to the Dornian mood, of flutes and soft recorders, such as raised to the height of noblest temper heroes old, arming to battle, and instead of rage, deliberate valor breathed, firm and unmoved, with dread of death to flight or foul retreat, not wanting power to mitigate and assuage with solemn touches troubled thoughts and chase anguish and doubt and fear and sorrow and pain from mortal or immortal minds. Thus they, breathing united in force with fixed thought, moved on in silence to soft pipes that charmed their painful steps o'er the burnt soil, and now, advanced in view, they stand, a horrid front of dreadful length and dazzling arms and guise, of warriors old with ordered spear and shield, awaiting what command their mighty chief had to impose, though he through the armed files darts his experienced eye, and soon traverse the whole battalion views their order due, their visages and stature as of gods, their number last he sums, and now his heart distends with pride, and hardening in his strength glories, for never since created man met such an embodied force, as namely with these could merit more than that small infantry, warred on by cranes through all the giant brood of Phlegara with the heroic race were joined that fought at Thebes and Ilium, on each side mixed with auxiliar gods. And what resounds in fable or romance of Uther's son, begirt with British and Armoric knights, and all who since baptized or infidel jousted in Asparmont or Montalban, Damasco or Morocco, Trebizond, or whom Bizerta sent from the Afric shore. When Charlemagne with all his peerage fell by Fontariba, thus far these beyond compare of mortal prowess, yet observed their dread commander, he above the rest, in shape and gesture proudly eminent, stood like a tower, his form had not yet lost all her original brightness, nor appeared less than archangel ruined, and the excess of glory obscured, as when the sun new risen looks through the horizontal misty air, shorn of his beams, or from behind the moon in dim eclipse disastrous twilight sheds on half the nations, and with fear of change perplexes monarchs, darkened so, yet shone above them all the archangel. But his face deep scars of thunder had entrenched, and care sat on his faded cheek, but under brows of dauntless courage and considerate pride, waiting revenge, cruel his eye, but cast signs of remorse and passion to behold, that fellows of his crime, and followers rather, for other once beheld in bliss, condemned forever now to have their lot in pain, millions of spirits for his fault immersed of heaven, and from eternal splendors flung for his revolt, yet faithful how they stood, their glory withered, as when heaven's fire hath scathed the forest oaks or mountain pines, with singed top their stately growth, though bare, stands on the blasted. He now prepared to speak, whereat their doubled ranks they bend from wing to wing, and half enclose him round with all his peers. Attention held them mute. Thrice he essayed, and thrice, in spite of the scorn, tears such as angels weep burst forth. At last, words interwove with sighs found their way out. Oh my god, finally a section break. He rambles. That was 400 lines. Just straight. Brutal. I'm so sorry anyone had to endure that. But if you couldn't follow, I can barely follow this. We're going through the Beelzebubs, the satanic followers, the cast out angels, and according to Milton, each one becomes an idol among humans. That area. He just goes through the cast of characters, which was a lot delightful, really fun to read. And now we have we have 200 lines left in this book. And it seems like we get in our soliloquy from Satan, which will be far more interesting than what we just read. All right. O myriads of immortal spirits, O powers, matchless, but with the Almighty, and that strife was not inglorious, though the event was dire. As this place testifies in this dire change, hateful to utter, but what power of mind, foreseeing or presaging from the depth of knowledge past or present could have feared, how such united force of gods, how such as stood like these could ever know repulse? For you who can yet believe, though after loss, that all these puissant legions, whose exile hath emptied heaven, shall fail to reascend, self-raised, and repossess their native seat, For me be witness all the host of heaven, if counsels different or dangers shunned, by me have lost our hopes. But he who reigns monarch in heaven, till then as one secure, sat on his throne upheld by old repute, consent or custom, and his regal state put forth at full, but still his strength concealed, which tempted our attempt and wrought our fall. Henceforth his might we know, and know our own, so as not either to provoke or dread new war provoked. Our better part remains too close to work in close design by fraud or guile. What force affected not, that he no less at length from us may find, who overcomes by force hath overcome by half his foe. Space may produce new worlds, whereof so rife there went a fame in heaven that he ere long intended to create, and therein plant a generation whom his choice regard should favor equal to the sons of heaven. Thither, if but to pry, shall be perhaps our first eruption. Thither or elsewhere, for this infernal pit shall never hold celestial spirits in bondage, nor the abyss long under darkness cover. But these thoughts full counsel must mature. Peace is despaired, for who can think submission? War then, war, open or understood, must be resolved. All right, it's a call to war. And he is saying that there's this prophecy in heaven that God will create the earth. This is pre-earth. We're in pre-earth times. But there's this prophecy that the earth will be created, and Satan is conspiring to insurrect it. And now he meets with his council to discuss. He spake, and to confirm his words out flew millions of flaming swords drawn from the thighs of mighty cherubim. The sun blazed far round illuminated hell. Highly they raged against the highest, and fierce with grasped arms clashed on their sounding shields the din of war, hurling defiance toward the vault of heaven. All right, and the other cast out angels agree with him. There stood a hill not far, whose grisly top belched fire and rolling smoke. The rest entire shone with a glossy scurf, undoubted sign that in his womb was hid metallic ore, the work of sulphur. Thither winged and with speed, a numerous brigade hastened, as when bands of pioneers with spade and pickaxe armed forerun the royal camp to trench a field or cast a rampart. Mammon led them on. Mammon, the least erected spirit that fell from heaven, for even in heaven his looks and thoughts were always downward bent, admiring more the riches of heaven's pavement trodden gold than aught divine or holy else enjoyed. In vision beatific, by him first, men also, and by his suggestion taught, ransacked the center, and with impious hands rifled the bowels of their mother earth, rifled the bowels of their mother earth, for treasures better hid. Soon had his crew opened into the hill a spacious wound, and digged out ribs of gold. Let none admire that riches grow in hell, that soil may be best deserve the precious bane. And here let those who boast in mortal things, and wondering tell of Babel and the works of Memphian kings, learn how their greatest monuments of fame and strength and art are easily outdone by spirits reprobate, And in an hour, what an age, they with incessant toil and hands innumerable scarce perform. Nigh on the plain in many cells prepared, that underneath had veins of liquid fire, sluiced from the lake a second multitude. With wondrous art founded the massy ore, severing each kind and scummed the Bolian dross. A third as soon had formed within the ground, by a various mold, and from the boiling cells by strange conveyance filled each hollow nook, as in an organ from one blast of wind. To many a row of pipes the soundboard breathes. Anon out of the earth a fabric huge rose like an exultation, with the sound of dulcet symphonies and voices sweet, built like a temple where pilasters round were set and Doric pillars overlaid with golden architrave. Nor did there want cornice or phrase with bossy sculptures graven. The roof was fretted gold, not Babylon, nor great Alcaro, with such magnificence, equalled in all their glories to enshrine Belus or Serapis their gods, or seat their kings, when Egypt with Assyria strove in wealth and luxury. The ascending pile stood fixed her stately height, and straight the doors, opening their brazen folds, discover wide, within her ample spaces o'er the smooth and level pavement, from the arched roof, pendant by subtle magic, many a row of starry lamps and blazing cressets fed with naphtha and asphaltus yielded light, as from a sky. The hasty multitude admiring entered, and the work some praise and some the art and the work some praise and some the architect. His hand was known in heaven by many a towered structures high, where sceptred angels held their residence, and sat as princes whom the supreme king exalted to much power and gave to rule, each in his hierarchy, the orders bright. Nor was his name unheard or unadored in ancient Greece, and in Ausonian land men called him Mulciber, and how he fell from heaven they fabled, thrown by angry Jove, sheer o'er the crystal battlements. From morn to noon he fell, from noon to dewy eve, a summer's day, and with the setting sun dropping from the zenith like a falling star on Lemnos, the Aegean isle. Thus they relate, erring, for he with this rebellious rout fell long before, nor aught availed him now to have built in heaven high towers, nor did he escape by all his engines, but was headlong sent with his industrious crew to build in hell. Meanwhile, the winged heralds by command of sovereign power, with awful ceremony and trumpets sound throughout the host proclaim, a solemn council forthwith to be held at Pandemonium, the high capital of Satan and his peers, their summons called from every band and squared regiment. By place or choice the worthiest, they anon with hundreds and with thousands trooping came, attended, and access was thronged. The gates and porches wide, but chief the spacious hall, though like a covered field where champions bold wont ride and armed, and at the Soldan's chair defied the best of Paynim chivalry to mortal combat or career with lance. Thick sworn both on the ground and in the air, brushed with the hiss of rustling wings as bees in springtime, when with the sun the Taurus rides, pour forth their pompous youth above the hive. In clusters they among fresh dews and flowers fly to and fro, or on the smoothed plank, the suburb of their straw-built citadel, new rubbed with balm, expatiate and confer their state of affairs. So thick the airy crowd swarmed and were straitened, till the signal given, behold a wonder, They but now who seemed in bigness to surpass earth's giant suns, now less than smallest dwarves, in a narrow room, though throng numberless, like that Pygmean race beyond the Indian mount, or fairy elves whose midnight revels by a forest's side, or some fountain some belated peasant sees, or dreams he sees, while overhead the moon sits arbitress, and nearer to the earth wheels her pale course. They on their mirth and dance, intent with jocund music and charm his ear. At once with joy and fear his heart rebounds. Thus incorporeal spirits to smallest forms reduced their shapes immense and were at large, though without number still amidst the hall of that infernal court, but far within, and in their own dimensions like themselves, the great seraphic lords and cherubim in close recess and secret conclave sat, 1,000 demigods on golden seats, frequent and full. After short silence then, and summons read, the great consult began. Oh, okay. A different bookmark. That was book one. So to recap book one. Thank you for joining, Stefan Bassiou. Really glad to have you here. You caught the last 100 or so lines of book one, Paradise Lost. We had Satan cast out of heaven. He soliloquizes that his only aim is to do bad despite good, in spite of good, do bad through good. And they're cast, him and his followers, the cherubim, the seraphim, are cast down below chaos to hell, to their lake of lava and fire. And then Satan confers with his nearest mate, and they rise up and they rally the fallen angels by their hundreds and thousands. And at the end there, they are mining the mountains of hell for minerals and gold, and they build this meeting hall, the Palace of Hell. And that's where we leave off, with them calling a meeting of the most eminent seraphim and cherubim, or seraphic lords and cherubim. That was exhausting to read. Okay, I'm going to take off and go to sleep and decide if I want to ever read Paradise Lost again. But it was a good time. Thank y'all.